Framers anticipated that when nothing gets done, that's not an excuse for the president to resort to little self-help. What the Obama administration has done really seriously warps the separation of powers and key congressional prerogatives in several ways. The first one is the right of Congress to determine the rules of its proceedings, which is very clearly spelled out in Article 1. The president's functionalist approach strips this power away from Congress and claims, in effect, that the president can look past Congress's description of its own actions and determine for itself what is happening here. Now, why is that such a big deal? What fundamentally do is would shift the balance of power between the two political branches. It's not a small shift. We know that the president participates in the legislative business, but his power to block legislation is not an absolute one. President vetoes have been overridden, certainly can be overridden. But under the functionalist approach, the president would be able to disregard without even bothering to veto legislation during mere statutes that Congress has properly enacted. How so? Well, the president can say that the Senate really was not transacting morning business in the morning. Quorum was not there, no vote was taken. So any legislation that was passed without the quorum of the Senate, and I emphasize this is how most of the Senate's business is done. There's no limiting principle here, no fundamental distinction between the normal business and most pro forma sessions, when the statute was unlawful, can be disregarded with impunity. And future presidents would be able to fill their administration with numerous unconfirmed officials serving for close to 2 years. Indeed, they may not even bother to seek Senate's advice and consent, as President Obama did with the 2 NLRB commissioners. This, of course, would again dramatically alter the balance of power between the two political branches by preventing the Senate, God forbid, from blocking the very people they wanted to block, which again, they have absolute constitutional right to do so. I'm reasonably confident, and we can discuss that a bit more, that the courts will strike down this unprecedented usurpation of congressional power by the president. If I may, in the last few minutes, rewritten the Constitution in several important respects. And maybe it's a good idea as a matter of political science to strike that kind of bargain, but it would be utterly violate the constitutional text. First of all, with respect, the Senate was not in constitutionally meaningful recess. What you've done at the very front end is you define the word recess for yourself. Let's be clear about something. The framers absolutely expected, and I said it early on in my remarks, the framers' approach to checks and balances allows each branch to checkmate another. The framers fully expected, with all due respect to Doug, and the need for energy in the executive and need to execute the law, framers expected that the Senate may be able to block, permanently block, and denude the president of an opportunity to staff the executive branch. And the price they'll pay for it, ladies and gentlemen, is a political price. There's no way for the Senate to protect its powers. Back to my cat and mouse game. No matter how they try to organize themselves, a willful president under a functionalist approach that would confuse the two issues, which I think Walter confuses. Inability to provide advice and consent and unwillingness to provide consent. The inability is one thing. The inability has objective standards. Unwillingness is not. And the Senate can reject a president's nominee either by holding an up or down vote, or filibustering the vote, or doing absolutely nothing. The bottom line is this. Under the approach adopted by this administration and defended with such vigor by Walter and Doug, there's no way for the Senate to protect its prerogative, which the framers clearly, and again, Mort has excellent discussion about what happened in the Committee of Detail and how it is voted upon. I'm not going to belabor that. The Senate is totally bereft of any power. But not just that. I mean, I've not heard anybody address my point that if you allow a coordinate branch, the executive, to pass judgments on whether or not the Congress properly legislated, you have completely upset the balance relative to the legislature. Because I'll tell you again how. The Senate votes very rarely. Lots and lots of Senate's business is done without a quorum by unanimous consent. And by the way, in terms of availability, the way those pro forma sessions work, and not to act as if I'm a great expert on the Senate procedure, but I actually went and talked to people who've done nothing but that for years. The reason they have 2 members, ladies and gentlemen, in pro forma sessions is because 1 member in a pro forma session can do anything, including confirming somebody to be a Supreme Court justice without any hearings. But the totality of Senate's legislative power can be exercised in a pro forma session. And the orders, the so-called standing orders, are nothing more than the starting point So the reason you have those sessions, you can do anything you can, okay? And let's face it, Senate doesn't work very hard, okay? So if you're gonna take the position that their unavailability, or rather, let's redefine that, their unwillingness to give a president what he wants triggers recess appointments, we're gonna have recess appointments all over the place, and the president can control the entire flow of legislative business. That cannot be.